Hi, Bob Canote, Camp Chaos. And what we're going to do today is introduce a series that we call Escape from Camp Chaos. And what that involves is basically presenting to you anything that we do out of the shop, like road tests and road trips and that sort of thing. This particular series is going to deal with this, my 1990 Jaguar XJS convertible. And what we're going to do here is take this car that has 140,000 miles on it, and with minimal preparation, drive it to Rapid City, South Dakota, see the sights, and drive it on back. Now, before we go, I've got my checklist of an even baker's dozen stuff that we need to do to maximize the probability that this car is going to come back some way other than on the hook of a tow truck. So let's take a look at the items on this list and do a bit of a walk around. Dang it. Okay, item number one on the checklist, coolant leak. Well, up until 24 hours ago, this thing was 100% leak-free. But this morning before I took it to coffee, I pulled it out of the shop and there was a little puddle there and it's coolant. So we're gonna have to figure out where that's coming from. Given its position relative to where the car was sitting, I suspect a water pump issue. Not a big deal, it just involves taking everything off of the front of the engine between there and the radiator. And as long as we're at it, we might as well remove the radiator and find the leak and rectify the problem. Number two on the checklist, remove and inspect the fuel tank. Now, if you remember from the Texas XJS episodes, that was a big problem. I poured fuel in it, anticipating starting the car, and it ran out the bottom just about as fast as I poured it in the top. These cars have a real problem with fuel tank leakage. And that's because there's a foam mat in between the tank and the ledge, which is right in that area up there. And that absorbs moisture and it retains it and it rots the tank out. What you don't want to have happen is you get 500 miles out and your tank starts leaking. So it's a relatively easy thing. It takes about a half hour to take it out, less time to put it back in. And while we've got it out, we can do a number of other things. One of which is to locate the source of a leak that I experienced one time when I filled it all the way up to the top with fuel, and it leaked fuel for 3 days. I suspect one of those vent lines in the upper right-hand corner of the fuel tank, which you can't see from here, be right about there. One of those is cracked, and when you fill the tank, it leaks out of there. So we'll deal with that. Another thing that we did on the Texas XJS that we're going to have to do here, being that I kind of smell fuel when I start this thing up, is we're going to have to inspect all fuel hoses in the engine bay. And that would be the fuel injection lines, not only the ones between the rail and the injectors, but also the lines that take fuel from the firewall to the regulator, to the fuel injection rail, and then back to the fuel tank. We're going to have to look at all of those. Now, the good news here is that we don't have to do the fuel injector lines right here because they all have been recently replaced. They're nice and soft and flexible, and that takes quite a bit of time. But this line right here that runs from the regulator to the heat exchanger, that's all cracked. That's ready to go. Even though that's not under pressure, that really should be replaced. So we're going to look at all the fuel lines and replace them as necessary, just as we did on the Texas XJS. The next item on the list is to inspect and replace as necessary all fuel hoses in the trunk, which while we're doing the fuel tank inspection, we can do that at that time as well. Then we get into the normal maintenance things like engine oil and filter change, transmission fluid and filter change. One thing that is not normal maintenance is replace the fuel regulators, because this car has a tendency to, once it's warm, to try to restart it, it tends to, you know, spin the starter a lot before it finally catches kind of feebly and then eventually gets running normally. And I suspect one or both of the fuel regulators is leaking. And particularly when the engine is warm and it's really hot under the hood, fuel is either leaking back one way or the other to the pump or the tank and causing it to start hard. So I've got those on order. They'll be in next week, along with everything else that we need, hoses and belts, which is the next item on the list, which is going to be done when we actually deal with the oil or the coolant leak up front. Replace the fuel filter, easy. We'll do that when we do the tank. Service the AC. That's kind of an interesting thing, because not only does the air conditioning keep you comfortable, but it keeps the fuel comfortable as well. The problem with this engine is that even when it's running normally and not overheating, it is really hot underneath this hood. So as fuel goes from the tank up here through the fuel rail and then back to the returning back to the tank, it picks up a lot of heat. And on warm days, it just gets to the point where this whole setup gets hot enough where it can actually vapor lock while the engine's running. More commonly though, when it sits for a few minutes after you run it on a hot day. So right here what we've got is a heat exchanger. And you'll see that it is a jacket that wraps its way around the air conditioning hose that runs from the evaporator back to the compressor. And the fuel that's coming off of this regulator and going back to the tank actually has to go through this jacket that is wrapped around the air conditioning line, which is cold, and then it goes from there back to the tank. And the point is, of course, to keep the cool fuel enough so that it doesn't vapor lock. From this point on, we're dealing with things like changing the tires. Tires look reasonably good, but they are starting to weather check, which you can see right here if you can get close enough. Probably good enough to take the trip, but we've got an almost brand new set that are on the Texas XJS that we're going to be swapping out car to car. Clean and organize the trunk. You saw what that thing looks like. And then item number 13, clean and wax inside and out. That's for our own psychological well-being. You need to do that when you're taking off on a road trip. So there you have it. Let's get to work. Sitting on top of the XJ40.
On the rope?
Yeah, the banjo bolt arrangement right there. Loosening that hose, this hose, these 4 bolts.
Tell us motor swap?
Yeah. I didn't tell you this?
You mentioned something like to see as a build up.
You're not listening
motor
to me when I'm speaking, do you?
Well,
kind of do your own thing.
Kind of, but
yeah. Otherwise it would be chaos. Good as new. The difference between this and the wire. We need to take that off. Work on that fan clutch.
because I got my big fat hand.
There you go. The camera can't interfere. Look out. That's off. Another zip tie. Okay. You should be able to pull it. Okay. At this point, we've got, loosen this here. Transmission, why don't you handle the transmission lines? I'll get this hose. And then the radiator should come right out. Oh, look at the front of this thing. I'd turn it over, but tell you what, why don't you haul that bucket out?
Got some cat hair on. Where's the Jaguar back?
Well, this is one of the reasons why you pull the radiator out. You can see you've got a lot of debris on the bottom here that restricts the flow of air through it, which is going to affect the cooling certainly. That's the bad news. The good news is the radiator appears to be, wouldn't you say this is a pretty fresh radiator?
Doesn't look that old.
Yeah.
The only thing is it's got all the junk on it.
Yeah. So it was a good plan to pull the radiator out. Now, as far as the hoses are concerned, let me get this in a less vulnerable position here. So that was 40 minutes to take the radiator out. I don't know that that's a world record, but that's pretty quick.
Not too bad.
Yeah. Okay, so at this point, what I'm going to do over the next couple of days is replace the hoses. And the hoses don't look that bad, but they certainly could stand to be freshened up a little bit. Like I said, what we're going to do is we're going to take the hoses off of this car, which aren't that bad, and put them on the Texas XJS, on which the hoses are bad. So waste not, want not. So that's my marching orders for the next couple of days, is get this sorted out, and then we'll stick the radiator back in, get this back together, and move on to the next project.
Is that it?
Well, you said you only had an hour. What do you want? You know,
That's not an hour and a
I bet
half. Are we going to take the water pump off? Or?
we could do that if you got the time.
Yeah, I got some time.
Okay. Okay, try to pull the belt.
Ready on that.
Oh yeah. Okay, clear. Watch your head. Try that. While it is greasy, I expected worse. As soon as you pull that off, then we can get at the water pump. Now there are a number of ways that people use to organize nuts and bolts, make sure they that they're easily found when stuff goes back together. My method of choice is Ziploc bags, and put it with part, or better yet, zip tie it on, but no place to zip tie it. Hey buddy, 10,000 steps today. This long stud is coming out, which is good news, because a lot of times what happens is the stud gets seized up in the front cover of the engine because of electrolysis, and there we go, we're free at this point. And if you ever have to pull the front cover, it's just a horrendous job. That's what I'm talking about. Oh, jeez. This doesn't feel good. We may have an issue. This one right here is really ugly. It feels like it's seized. This may be one of those that I make a day out of it tomorrow and just work on that. Because if that breaks, then it's, you know, drilling, threading. Oh man, this does not feel good. Yeah, it's seized in there. Well, we can pull everything else out, but this one right here, I'm going to have to take some time and just... The issue is, I got a bolt here that is seized in the aluminum casing or aluminum housing, and the bolt have, through electrolysis, have seized together. And what I do not want to do is break that off. So what I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm going to take a torch and heat that, and see if I can get it to loosen up. If it's, the water pump's got to come off anyway. I could take a, you know, the little 4-inch death wheel and relieve that. But I do not want to break that off, because then it's a matter of drilling it, and it's got to be right in the center, and threading it, and that would all be necessary if I were to break it off, which if I were to keep going at it right now, I would. So we'll make believe that doesn't exist for another 12 hours. I was flying pretty high there for a moment. Thought this was gonna come apart like butter. Now we got another one. And it's been rounded off. Well, this is a very bad thing. Yeah. We're going to wait on that. What I don't want to do is hurry and end up snapping off either one of those two bolts. And if that happens, that really complicates things. It involves a lot of very careful drilling and threading, and we don't want to do that if we don't have to. So looks like we're done for the day, and I'm thinking that in less than 2 hours we almost had a water pump off a Jaguar V12, which in my world, that's a pretty good thing. And it always helps when you got a competent helper to help move the project along. I'm going to go wash my hands.